Hey everybody, working on a 1550 PTO unit today, and thought I'd make another video to help everybody out, hopefully. I already got the unit off the tractor, done that back in the summer. Didn't take the time to film it, but going back together, you'll get the idea how it comes off. This one's shaft's a little loose in the bearing there, and it's seal shot, it's letting oil by, it just needs a total tear down to get everything right. So I'm going to take the oil out of it. The only way to really drain the oil, there is no drain, take the cover off the bottom. Earlier ones like your 77s, 88s, 66s that use the same style PTO unit, rebuild's going to be pretty much the same on them, but they did go to a cast iron cover on some of the bigger tractors later on. There was modifications to the PTO unit in the triple digit series. This hole got bigger to accommodate a larger gear. Here, your pinion gear that drove this gear, because 1000 RPM PTO became an option for the 770 and 880. And so the larger gear needed a larger hole, changed the bearings. And so you got stuff like that going on, but the basic gist of it's all the same. Give me a moment here, I'll take that cover off. Okay, through the magic of pausing, now I have the cover off. It's just those bolts, 7 bolts on this particular PTO unit. The bolt arrangement's a little bit different on some of the earlier tractors, but it's just bolts and a gasket. And you can see the bottom of the gear, oil's draining out. We'll get to disassembly in just a moment. Okay, I got that oil drain over here at the bench. Just wanted to point out a couple of differences between some of the early and late upper pinion shafts. Normally the long shaft that goes to the engine goes through these holes. Your 88s, 77s, supers, you're gonna find this with the snap ring holding the bearing on. When you pull the upper shaft in this whole assembly, the bearing's gonna come with it. 1550, maybe 1600. They had this bigger bearing housing because of that 1000 gear shaft, or 1000 RPM gear, but the bearing was big enough to slide over this gear. On this one, the gear is splined on because you have to take the gear off to get the bearing off, change that. This one, the bearing will fit over the gear, so they just machine the gear right into the shaft, save an extra machining step, extra parts. But you won't see the snap ring on here, and the bearing actually stays in the housing. And how they do that, I'll tap this out. If I can hit it right. As you can see, someone's been in there before, that silicone. This bearing has a snap ring. So this is sandwiched between this PTO housing and the rear end housing. So that snap ring keeps this bearing in place. It's not going anywhere. So when you pull your engine shaft on a 1550, it's gonna pull kind of hard because that bearing has to slide off from this shaft. So you usually have to do a little bit of prying. And it's not too much different on 88s, 80s, fleet lines, because this bearing's in the housing and it's got a little bit of resistance. So it usually takes just a little bit of prying to get them to pop loose. Okay, now to further disassemble things, silicone. I wanted the bigger one. There's a snap ring in the back here for the lower shaft. Take your handy dandy screwdriver. There's a couple different styles of this retainer. This later with the 2 halves. There's a half over here, retained by a snap ring, and then there's a cap back there to keep everything in. Some of the earlier ones didn't have that. It just had a snap ring with a cap. The cap could kind of get loose and let oil leak by, and you get some seepage back there and dirty. So if you can find the stuff, you can update to this newer style. Oops. With the with the 2 pieces in the cap. That comes out. Got my little bucket with some mineral spirits there. Throw parts in. Oh, let's see. I might have to get an O-ring pick to get this cap out of there. Yep, take a break for a moment here while I get the right tools. Okay, a little tapping on the shaft, force the bearing back, pop the cap right out. There it is. Now I got to get this retainer off the shaft, the inner retainer. There's a snap ring on the outside of the bearing, but that would let the shaft go forward, but that won't get it all the way out. So on the inside here, right in front of the gear, there's a snap ring there. There it is. Go in there with your snap ring pliers or whatever and get that open and slipped forward. I'm going to need my hands to do that, so I'll stop for a moment and come back after I've got that off. Now, as you can see, I got the snap ring out of the groove, slid forward. Now I can drive the shaft back some. There's a kind of unique retainer back here. It's captured by the bearing, so you have to push the shaft out through the bearing some in order to get it out. Okay, I was able to push the shaft up some or towards the back, and then I drove the inner race of the bearing down some so it got away from this retainer. Now I can take that out. As you can see, it's got an inner lip that seats under the bearing, so you can't just use a pair of snap ring pliers to get this one off. Some of the older ones might have used just a snap ring. In that case, just kick your snap ring off, but you want to watch out for this particular style because you could be prying and prying for a long time and you're not going to get it out of there. Throw them in the cleaner. Now I should be able to drive the shaft on through. I'll have to move that snap ring out of or on the back side of the snap ring groove when I moved on the inside. But the shaft will go out the back side or towards the implement side of the tractor or PTO unit. So I'll take a moment to set things up to do that. One thing you might want to do before you drive it through, I'm noticing it on this one, you might get a little bit of burr on the back side of these spline remnants. I can kind of just see one up there at the top. Just from that shaft kind of shucking in there and that retainer hitting against it, it kind of knurls it up a little bit. Probably not a bad idea to take a file, just clean those up a little bit just to make it slide through the bearing easier. As you can see, I've gotten past the snap ring there. You want to remember to keep moving that snap ring back, or it's just going to keep following up front and hit the bearing, the needle bearing and stuff up here and cause you grief. It's not going to be so bad once it's past the snap ring groove, because then it'll slide on the shaft. But it's better to go a little ways, keep sliding it back, take a screwdriver down in there, just slide it on the shaft or whatever. Okay, I got my handy dandy seal and bearing puller. Imagine you know, a little bit of long punch and a screwdriver or something. You can probably just pry that seal out of there, but this thing just works pretty darn handy. Tighten up the jaws. Give her a few pulls and bam, my seal's out. We'll dig around in there, look for the snap ring. Make everybody seasick by turning my phone. Oh wow, that bearing was bad. How loose, so much gap there is between them needles. No wonder that poor shaft was wiggling around. Yep. Okay, this one has an internal eye-type snap ring. There's the eye holes. I gotta go get the right tool for that. Okay, got my snap ring pliers. And they need tightened up. Got her. Snap rings out. I can use my puller to get that bearing out of there if it doesn't just fall out. You can see them rollers were just loose. There's a couple different sizes of bearings on these, depending on if it's early or late. So you might want to consult the parts book. I'll try to add part numbers in when I can. Make it a little easier. Manufacturer part numbers for some of these bearings and seals. Makes it a little easier to shop for them, get better deals. But I'll pull that baby out. It's hard to see, but there's a lip of the housing that bearing seats against. So that just doesn't give me enough room to get in there with my puller without grabbing onto that lip of the housing. Don't want to break that, so I am gonna go in there with a long punch and drive the remains of the bearing out. The needles didn't take much to fall apart and fall out of it. It didn't take much tapping to get that out of there. It wasn't in very hard. You can see it's out. Got it right here. What's remains of it. Here's all the needles. They just fell right out. I don't know if this thing will focus on it. This is a McGill bearing. See if I can read it. Come on. Looks like GP3022N. Yeah, we've got a new one. I'll give you the bearing number for that. Okay, so other than the filler plug on the top and the check level plug, this thing is all disassembled and ready to be washed up. I imagine we don't need to show that part, but I'll get this all cleaned up so we can start going back together. Okay, I've been inspecting parts a little bit. This is the one I just took out of that unit, and that loose bearing had its way with the shaft. There's just feel a little dip there. You know, I suppose if you're not going to use it a whole lot, it would probably work. It's not terrible. But the thing that concerns me more is right where that seal rides. There's a pretty good groove worn into the shaft. That would make it hard to seal. Now you could just not drive the seal in quite as far and hopefully get the lip working somewhere besides the groove. If you wanted to save the shaft, you could also have what they call a speedy sleeve, where it's a seal with a sleeve you drive over your shaft, and that gives you a new surface to work against. They're pretty slick. If I didn't have another shaft laying around, I'd probably do that on this one rather than trying to find another. I say it's not much. I can definitely, probably a thousandth different. I don't know, I can just catch my nail on it. But yeah, it's hard to see in here, but there's a pretty good groove there. That is not going to seal good. Whereas this one, I had. Things are a lot smoother. No wear line where the seal goes. No wear, no depth where the rollers rode. Only a slight amount of wear on the splines here, but it'll work. So I'm going to clean this shaft up and use this one instead of the old one. Okay, got things washed up, cleaned up, even chased out the bolt holes here. Some of you might wonder what those are for on the outside edge there. When they came out with a 770 and 880, they had power booster drive, and that took up the space where the belt pulley used to be, right in front of the transmission. So to still have a provision for belt pulley, they added these bolt holes on, and then a unit would bolt down and go over the PTO shaft, had a gearbox to turn the belt pulley at a 90-degree angle from the drive line. Then you could just back up, hook up your belt, and drive your belt operated equipment that way. So I got my bearing, and just in case you're wondering, this is a Koyo HJ223016. Did some cross-referencing and got it on the internet. Looks like a nice little bearing, and it even fits in the hole. And even with a name like Koyo, it does say USA on it, if you can see it there. Ooh. There it is. So I will get a suitable driver, which will probably end up being a socket that's the same diameter as this, and tap it on in. Okay, got that bearing in, got the snap ring in. I will say this bearing is for the later housings with these ears on them, the ones that were capable of being 1,000 RPM. The inside diameter of the bearing is the same because the shaft didn't change, but they did bore out the hole a little larger so they could get a heavier duty bearing in there because of the higher speeds. So this particular bearing is only for these later units. I will try to look up the bearing for the earlier ones and add it in later on when I edit the video. Next up is the seal. That's one of these. It would be that one. I like a good double lip seal on these outside ones to keep the dirt out away from the actual oil sealing lip and chewing things up. This one doesn't have any coating on it, so I'm going to have to get my aviation gasket stuff on there. This is a TCM 13203 TB-BX. I think let's see, 13569. Let me look at the old seal here. I did something with it. There it is. Well, suffice it to say, the old seal was a 13569. So that must be the CR number. And as you can see, this company puts the cross-reference numbers on the box. I would guess the 471-268 is probably a national seal number. Then your 13569 is the CR equivalent. I'll get my goop and a driver and put that seal in. Okay, got my seal prepped. Got my driver, handy dandy thing I found on the internet. Can't remember what it cost because I asked for it for Christmas, but just different size washers in there. You just pick the right one to support the rubber part, and a one that's just a little smaller in diameter than the outer. Assemble them with the bolt. They can slide out of the seal. Works pretty slick. Got my aviation gasket stuff on it. That's my preference on this. You don't get the over application like you do with regular silicone. Seals up good. But another job where I'm going to need two hands, maybe. There is a ledge in there to stop the seal, so you want to drive it down until you get to that point. But I will come back after I drive. Okay, got the seal drove in. Didn't go bad at all. Generally, you can feel when it hits that ledge and stops moving. I like to put a little grease on the lip so that when I put the shaft through, it lubricates the rubber. Less chance of something either rolling over, just snagging, cutting. Plenty of things that can go wrong. Okay, got her in the vise. Shaft just goes in there. Just be careful going through that seal so it don't catch on the splines and rip it up. Now once you get so far, there it is, inside, you got to get that snap ring that goes in the front side of the gear on the shaft before you put the gear in. So I'm going to do that. Okay, snap ring is in there. Not in the groove yet, but got to get the gear in there. Got my gear all cleaned up. You want the hub, the fat part, facing towards the output of the shaft. I think I can say fat. And, well, then you just start pushing the shaft through the gear, and I'll need both hands for that. Okay. Snap ring fell right into the groove. I just tapped on the shaft once I got it lined up with the gear, and that kept the snap ring sliding as the shaft went through until it's dropped in the snap ring groove. You don't have to move it forward when you're going together, because you can drop, well, I take that back. You do, in order to get that special locking collar in there. So I will get that snap ring past the groove so I can go farther out. Here's the bearing for the lower back part of the output shaft there, with one with a snap ring on it. There's your number, 6206-2RSNR. Okay, got things back on the bench, flipped it over. I'm going to take my hammer and punch and not hit the balls. Only hit that inner race, tap that in far enough to get that special retainer on. Then I can tap the shaft back down to lock the retainer in place. And then get the front snap ring back in the groove it belongs in too. Okay, got that bearing past the, so I can put these clips in. Okay, I don't have it far enough past. Okay, got the bearing driven through far enough to get these special retainers in. There's one. There's the other. Just two halves. And then we'll just, yep, two hands again, but tap the shaft back in. Might not hurt to put a little grease on these two retainer clips. That'll make them stick into the groove. I think that's what I'll do here in a moment. And then you can tap hands free. I should really watch what I'm doing through the camera. Okay. Okay. Got that retainer in. Was able to tap the shaft back forward. Don't want to whack on it too hard and bend things up or mushroom them over. Tap that in, then did some prying and got the snap ring back in the groove here. So that's all assembled. Before I could shuck this shaft around, and that won't grind once the back retainer is in place. All play is gone, turns nice and smooth, much better. Okay, we're ready to put this cover in. Definitely want to put some sealant around the edge of this. Silicone I'm going to use that aviation gasket, forma gasket stuff. Just don't get so much excess. Okay, that just tapped in with a hammer. Oh yeah. Tapped right in. I put some on the face, mating face before I tapped it in, and then wiped some more around there just to give it a good coating on the outside to seal it up. Then you take these two halves. The ledge has to go in so it can engage the snap ring hole for the old design. Get those two halves in. Then it's just a matter of squeezing that baby down enough to get it in there. And that part's done. Okay, that's in. That wasn't bad. Snap ring pops in there and helps hold the two halves out. Locks everything in place, keeps it nice and tight. Okay, we got the upper bearing that goes in here. On this style, the 1550, got that snap ring out here. That'll just tap in. Essentially the same size bearing as the older tractors, but it needs to have that snap ring built into the bearing. It's probably a good idea. Got a seal on one side, not on the other. And seal goes towards the tractor. You want to keep your gear lube in the rear end, but that way gear lube can get up and lubricate this bearing as it's running. This bearing only turns when the PTO is engaged. So it doesn't get a lot of use in some way unless you do a lot of PTO work, but probably a good idea to replace it just because it's got that seal in there. Keep your PTO oil from leaking into your rear end. Okay, got my pan gasket, lower end gasket for the cover there. Part number 16487A for this particular style of PTO unit. The earlier ones were a K number. I'll look that up and add it to the video. But I will use the aviation gasket sealer on this. This is not a critical dimension thing. If you don't want to get a gasket, silicone will suffice. Just don't overdo it. It's, if it's squeezing out on the outside, it's squeezing into the inside too, and you get bits of silicone flying around in there and plugging holes and stuff. So it's just, a light coating is all it takes. Okay, I've cleaned up the surface, and these are just 1/2-inch bolts where I cut the head off the end, ground a little taper into it. They make great guide pins for putting stuff like this together. I got a drawer with all sorts of different sizes. It'll hold the gasket in place, hold the unit in place. Now, because of this top bearing, I didn't order a new one. Thought I had, and I'm gonna put this in here for now just so I can do a mock-up of it going together. But it's a little loose. I don't like it. So I am going to replace that, but I have to get one ordered. So there will be no gasket dope on my gasket, but I'll just go through the procedure so you can see how to do it. Okay, got my dowel bolts in. Got my gasket slid on there. Just like that. They hold it in place. I could put the lower two bolts in, then spin those out, put the other two bolts in, tighten her down, kind of give it a little wiggle, make sure that bearing seats in like it's supposed to, and it's good to go. It's mounted on the tractor. I've also got the cover on the bottom all tightened down. So when you do finally fill it up, there's a plug in the top here, pipe plug, take that out, and then you just fill it up until there's a little pipe plug here. Take that one out and fill it up until the oil level gets to that, put both pipe plugs in, and you're ready to roll. I'll take the pinion shaft apart. That needs a new seal in it, and I'll cover that as well with this part. Okay, I gotta get this pinion out of here. Gotta take this snap ring off on this particular one. But there is a seal. It's in this part here, so you gotta get this shaft out. And of course, the shaft come out means it's gotta come through the bearing. So we'll get that snap ring off. Okay, got this set up in the press. It's something you want to be definitely careful on, not pushing too hard. It's not going hard at all. Just a little pressure to, but if you push too hard, these cast iron flanges are just gonna pop. But I took the snap ring off that was in there, and feels like I better be ready to catch that thing. Guess I better stop. Okay, I got it apart. I had been tapping with it down on the wood like that, tapping around the outside, and it was slowly working the bearing off. I didn't want to hit on the outer ears and break them off. Wasn't hitting it very hard, but that's why I finally put it in the press. It just went a little smoother, a little quicker. But now that I've got that out, here's a seal. Just got to pop that out. These are actually two halves. They should separate. And then there's a gasket that goes between them. And something else to watch for. There's a hole. And I believe there's a groove on the other side. We'll see here shortly. Bearing feels good on this one. I think I'm going to reuse the bearing. So let me get that. Okay, got that split apart. Just the gasket holding together. As you see, there's the oil drain hole. Here's the galley that leads to that, so these two want to sandwich together when you put it back together. You can see the seal here. That's the CR number 28798. I happen to have this one here with the nice box, as my good friend Blaine puts it, the ball of confusion, I think it is. Roll to surface ball of confusion. I gotta get the old seal drove out yet, but that'll take its place. Keep oil from getting on the PTO clutches, losing out. So let me drive that out. Okay, got that seal driven out. That didn't take much, just tap it with a punch. It dropped out on the floor. Get this stuff cleaned up. Here's the other part. Took the bearing out, just a little bit of gentle tapping with a hammer, and that took care of that. I'll wash this one up, but if you're looking to replace the bearing, I don't know if you can make out the number, but it's 6013N. It's got the snap ring built into it like the other ones, just larger. There's a groove in this inner half for the snap ring to set in to capture the bearing. And then gasket goes on here. I'm going to get all this stuff cleaned up so I can put it back together, put a new seal in here, and then put the pinion back in. And that'll be the end of the overhaul of the gear part of the gearbox, the PTO gearbox. There is a bearing that goes in here to support the live shaft that comes all the way from the engine. Got one of them right here. That is I think I got it dirty. I actually have a couple of them. A 6205 ZZ. That's ZZ means it's got a shield on each side, so it's sealed up. There still ends up being an oil seal in here, which is this thing, the XK 1590. I get that open, I'll get the CR number off from that. We'll put that in a little bit here. Thank you. Okay, drove the new seal in. Use the aviation gasket stuff to seal around the outside. It wasn't pre-coated. Got grease on the lip here. It only goes in from one direction. I'm sure the older PTO units take a different seal just because they have a different housing. I will look that up and get that stuff in here. I know they will take a different gasket. There's two of them. One goes between the two halves, and it's got a little cutout for that oil drain right there. So, and that one is 16486A. These gaskets are pretty gonna be pretty much only available from an AGCO dealer. Sometimes you can get engine gaskets other places, but these more specific things are just, that's the only way to get it. This is another one where I don't recommend silicone and prefer the thinner aviation gasket, because this lines up here, which is great. But if you got silicone, it could plug that drain hole pretty easy. And in this particular application, that ain't going to be too bad. The oil's just going to stay up here around the bearing, but it's going to put more pressure against the seal and maybe cause a leak sooner than if you had that drain to drain the excess oil off. So, got the seal cleaned up, got that. I just need to dope up my gaskets and put the two halves together, and I can slide it back on the pinion, which I still have to clean up. So I'll do that. Okay, I'm putting a new live shaft, the one that goes all the way from the engine back to the PTO in. And this ain't it. This is one actually out of a 1600 I have laying around. But I'll show you how it looks. Normally it would, the long end would stick through there, and the bearing would go down in there. Then you have this surface here for the seal to ride on. So I got to get that bushing there, the seal bushing off. I got a brand new bearing to put on my shaft, but I need the seal bushing again, which I took off from the one on that was already in that, or another tractor. It just presses on, and there's should be a snap ring right above this. It's not in right at the moment, and then another snap ring on the back side to keep them where they're supposed to be. So now I just need to, oops, get that snap ring off. The back side does not have a seal. The side towards the engine, so the lubrication can get in there. The side towards the PTO clutch is sealed, and then the lip seal goes against that other, which we'll see shortly. Okay, got my pinion all assembled. Got my power shaft, bearing on, snap ring on that side, the seal surface and snap ring on that. So then, that goes on like that. And there. You tap that in, and then the seal acts as a retainer for that. So tap that in. Okay, that tapped in pretty easy. It's back in there. Like I said, there's no snap ring on this part. Now, the XK1590 seal, which is also, it's also the same as a, well, that must be a national number since it starts with a 4. Woo. Come on. Anyways. There, 480248, the seal number there. This one ain't coated with any treatment, so I'll have to put my sealant stuff on that. I'll put a little grease on the lip so it slides over, but you can see, just drive it in there until it bottoms out. Lip goes over that sealing surface right in there. And then this is ready for the clutch to be assembled on it. Okay, I've got this ready to go. Got the seal in. once the PTO clutch housing is bolted onto here, that retains the seal. The seal retains the bearing. That's why there's no snap ring needed. But anyways, you would slide it in. I'm not going to go all the way because I don't want to drive into that bearing that I got to take back out to replace. But line up the... Oh, that fell off the bearing. But line up, there's notches on these bigger ones to miss the bolt heads. So you want them lined up on both the front and the back piece. And then if the gasket as well is cut to match. And then there's another gasket back here. Same thing, just get to that little oil drain thing at the bottom and the bolt notches up at the top. Then you can tap it in so that it goes into that bearing, and then put your 3 bolts in through the housing to draw it in, and that part is done then. And I will make a separate video for rebuilding this clutch pack. But that is the gist of going through these, replacing any bearings and seals, getting her oil tight, and even switching out a shaft if you need it. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching.